Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. What is a 2-5-1? Well, according to Wikipedia, a 2-5-1 progression, occasionally referred to as a 2-5-1 turnaround and 2-5-1, is a common cadential chord progression used in a wide variety of musical genres, including jazz harmony. It is a succession of chords whose roots descend in fifths from the second degree, the supertonic, to the fifth degree, dominant, and finally to the tonic. All right, that's a very academic explanation of it and might be a little confusing and overwhelming for some of you. So in this video, and actually in this 3-part series I'm doing on 2-5-1s, that's right, today, October 6th, next Friday, October 13th, and the Friday after that, October 20th, I'm gonna be doing a video on each of those Fridays about 2-5-1s. They're gonna be simple, concise, to the point, and I'm gonna hopefully be able to explain exactly what a 2-5-1 is, how to play over it, and how to add some other things to it so you can actually use it when you're improvising and it's not just some theoretical thing out there on a Wikipedia page. There is a PDF that goes along with this video, and you can get that completely free. All you have to do is go to the description down below. There's a link at the top, and also I'm gonna put that same link in the pinned comment. It's gonna be the same PDF that I'm gonna dive into in a minute on the screen here, but it would be great if you grabbed it for yourself to not only follow along, but so when you're practicing and you're trying to figure this stuff out on your own, you have it as a reference. Speaking of that PDF, I'm now gonna jump inside it, so here we go. All right, as you see, I have the PDF up and it is called What is a 2-5-1? Why do I call it that? Well, that's what this video is about. It's just explaining what a 2-5-1 is. And a lot of you are gonna have questions about this, and I'm gonna hopefully simplify it and make it very easy for you to understand. There are treble clef and bass clef versions of this PDF. I'm gonna be looking at the treble clef version, as you see here, just because I play saxophone, I'm a treble clef person, and I think most of you are treble clef, but if you're a bass clef player, make sure you're looking at the bass clef sheet. So to start out, I'm gonna do things in the key of C major, just concert C, because it's gonna be very easy to see any alterations to these chords and to these notes, so it'll be a little easier for you to understand. The first thing I want you to understand is everything is based off of a major key or a major scale. In this video, I'm only gonna be talking about 2-5-1s in major, so that's why I'm doing that. I'm a big believer that the major scale is one of the most important things you should practice. So I put here the C major scale. You'll see under each note of the scale, I numbered each one, 1 all the way up through 8, and I put that in parentheses because that's the same note, C, as 1. It's just an octave higher. So I wrote 8 in parentheses, but it's really the 1 when we talk about harmony because we're not really differentiating octaves. If you don't know your major scales, or you don't know any major scales, that's a really good starting point on your instrument. No matter what instrument you play, I think major scales are super important. Do you need to know all 12 major scales perfectly to understand what a 2-5-1 is? No. That's why I'm gonna make it a little simpler for you. As long as you know one major scale, in this case, the C major scale, you're gonna be okay, and you're gonna know by the end of this video what a 2-5-1 is. So if you look at the second line here, you'll see that I have 3 whole notes. I have D, G, and C. And underneath them are the corresponding numbers that you saw above. D is the 2 in the key of C, 5 is G, and then here we go with the 1 again, is C. So at its core, when I say 2-5-1, I'm literally saying the second something, in this case, the second note of the C major scale, the fifth note of the C major scale, and the first note of the C major scale. Understanding how numbers correlate with notes, and in a second how they correlate with chords, is going to be the key to understanding jazz harmony. So if you've ever been confused about what the numbers mean, what's a 2-5-1? What is this? Well, it starts with literally talking about the notes 2, 5, 1 of a key. This is why it's important to know your major scales. So when we say 2, 5, 1, traditionally we're actually talking about chords. What kind of chords? How do we construct those chords? Well, at its simplest, if you read right here, if you construct a seventh chord diatonically, which means in the key of, in this case, C major, starting on each note, you'll get, pause. Before we get into the actual notes, what is a seventh chord? Well, in jazz, we talk about seventh chords. It's a 4-note chord, taking a root note and then skipping up a third, either minor, major, some type of third, up to a next note, skipping up a third, and skipping up a third. So it's a skip every other letter. A, C, E, G, D, F, A, C. Like that, just skip every other letter, 4 total notes with alterations, which you don't have to worry about right now. But if you take that root note of each number, so in this case, we're talking about the 2 chord. So what is the 2? The note is D. So in the key of C, remember we have no sharps, no flats in this particular key. If you start on D, skip the next note, which would be E, then you'd play F. Then skip the next note G, play A, skip the next note, and then you get C. So you're just skipping every other letter starting on a certain root. In this case, it's the 2. What is the 2 of C? D. What's the key signature? No sharps, no flats. You don't actually have to know right now that that makes a D minor 7 chord. All you have to know is, oh, you're building a diatonic, which means in the key of, 7th chord based on the 2 of a certain key. So you can do this for any key you want, and we're going to get into that in a second. But that's how you build the 2 chord, and it happens to build a minor 7 chord. So you could say that as the 2 chord in C major is D minor 7. Now we're going to look at the 5 chord. Same exact process. We're going to build a 7th chord based on the root here. In this case, it's the note G. So you start on the note G, skip the next letter, which would be A, you go to B, skip C, you got D, skip E, go to F. Is it F sharp or F natural? You know that because we're in the key of C major, everything right now will be natural. When you get those 4 notes, G, B, D, F, that creates a G7 chord, G dominant 7. Then finally, the 1 chord, you build a 7th chord on the root 1 of C. So you would take C, skip D, E, skip F, G, skip A, B. So you have the notes C, E, G, B. That creates a C major 7 chord. That was a super quick overview, but I want you to understand that when we talk about 2-5-1, it's important to understand we're talking about a specific cadence, a specific turnaround in a specific key. All of those chords are related. That's why I really preach learning your major keys, major scales, because all of the chords and all the chord tones in a 2-5-1 are all based on the 1. So if I say a 2-5-1 in C major, that's telling you something. That's telling you you're going to play the 2 chord, the 5 chord, the 1 chord in C major. But that's also telling you that all the notes of all those chords are in the key of C major. Just like if I said we're going to play a 2-5-1 in F, all those notes and all the chord tones would fit F major. 2-5-1 in G flat. Whatever the 2-5-1 is in, whatever the root of the 1 is, the 2 chord and the 5 chord in that cadence of a 2-5-1 fits in that 1 major key. That's the number one thing to focus on. The root of the 1 major key, and everything else is built off of that. All right, if you look at the next line, you're going to see something that I was hesitant to put on here, but I wanted to address it because I get comments and questions about this all the time. And that is, what scale works over the chord? Now, disclaimer before you all jump into the comments or some of my friends text me about this, I am definitely not the person to say, when you see this chord, play this scale. There are options. When I see D minor 7, I'm not only thinking of one scale. I'm not only thinking of one sound. All 12 notes work over all 12 chords and all 12 scales and everything. You can use any note over any chord. That's basically what I'm saying. But right now, I want to show you how if you build a scale, we're still talking diatonically, this is what you get. So just like it says, if you construct a scale diatonically, once again, that means in the key of the major, we're starting on each note, you get, if you start on D and scale up in the key of C, you get D Dorian. D to D in the key of C. If you start on the note G and go up to G, also in the key of C major, you get G mixolydian. And then if you start on C and go up to C in the key of C, you get C major. These are all modes of the major scale. If you don't know what modes of a major scale are, it's basically taking the major key and just starting somewhere else. Just like you see, D Dorian is still just a C major scale. It's all the same notes as C major. We're just starting and ending somewhere different. You can do that for all 7. You could start a C major scale on the 3rd. On E, that would give you E Phrygian. If you started on F, it's called Lydian, and there's a whole bunch of other ones that I don't want to get into now. All you got to know is that if you do start it on the 2 or the 5, it's called Dorian Mixolydian. And if you start on 1, it's also called Ionian, but we all just call that a major scale. Now that you built a scale, now I think it's really important to go back and say, okay, which notes should we focus on if we're trying to learn a 2-5-1? Okay, you might go through the scale, you might go through the chord tones, but like, which ones do you actually play and which ones should you focus on when you're practicing these chords? And for most 7th chords, and specifically here in 2-5-1s, you're going to focus on the 3rd and the 7th of each chord. When you have a 7th chord, you have the root, the 3rd, the 5th, the 7th with some type of alteration. In a minor 7 chord, like you see here, D minor 7, the 3rd is always going to be a flat 3rd if you base it off its root. Now, I haven't talked about its own root yet. So if you thought D major and then you turn it into D minor 7, you would flat the 3rd, so F sharp would become F natural, C sharp would become C natural. But you know that if you're basing this off of the original key of C major, that's already done for you. You know the next note above D in the chord 1, 3, 5, 7 is going to be the note F. So that's the 3rd of D minor 7. You do the same thing for G7. G would be the root. The next note up in the chord is B, and there's your 3rd. Same thing, C major. If you take C major, C, E, G, B, the note above the root, the 3rd would be E. Those are the 3rds of each chord. Me personally, I think the 3rd is the most stable and really the best landing note when you're improvising. If you really want to just hit the chord and really sound like it's stable, it's rock solid, and you really know what you're doing, aim for the 3rds. That's going to be a really important thing. Like I said, 3rds and 7ths are important, so now let's talk about the 7th of each chord. If you're stacking the chord 1, 3, 5, 7, the 7th is going to be that top note. So for D minor 7, the top note is C. For G7, that note is going to be F natural. I moved it down an octave just to make it easier to read on here. And then the 7th of C major is going to be B. These 3rds and 7ths are incredibly important when we start talking about voice leading and really actually how to improvise through the chords, which I'm going to get into in the next video next week about 2-5-1s. But understanding them is a really good stepping stone into being able to improvise through them and not just playing any chord tone you want. Now, if you look right under this, I wrote both a 3rd and 7th for each chord, and I wrote it specifically this way because I want you to see something. This is kind of foreshadowing what we're going to talk about. If you notice here, the top note is C, which is the 7th here. That's very close to this note, which is the 3rd of G, B, which is very close, which i.e. it's the exact same as the 7th of C major, which is B. So you have the notes C, B, B, very close to one another, but you have the chord tones 7, 3, 7. Look on the bottom. If you start on the 3rd of D minor, you get F, just like we did up here. Then if you stay on that same note, F, that becomes the 7th of G7. And then you go down a half step, look what you get, E, which is the 3rd here, 3, 7, 3. So this 7, 3 to 7 and 3, 7, 3 relationship is a super powerful way to voice lead through a 2-5-1. I highly recommend when we get into this section down here on the next page about writing out 2-5-1s, when you actually go to practice them, besides just playing up and down the chord tones or the scales diatonically for each of the chords, I recommend doing 7, 3, 7 and 3, 7, 3 for each of the 2-5-1s. When you play it, especially if you play it along with a track, or you're just playing it with a root, or even just without any track, you're going to start to hear that voice leading and really be able to play through the chord changes and not just on each individual chord. Now, in the next page, I have some homework for you. I put all of the chord symbols here, 2-5-1s in all 12 keys, but I left it completely blank because I want you to write them all out. This is a great exercise to make sure you really understand it before playing it on your instrument. Taking things away from the instrument, like the technical aspect of the instrument itself, is really good to understand certain concepts. Then you go into the instrument. Now, if you already know all 12 major scales, all 12 dominant seventh, minor seventh, major, then this might not be super applicable to you, but it's still a good practice to do. Maybe see how fast you can write them all out. Because once you're able to write them all out, then you're going to be able to play all of them. Now, if you did look ahead in the PDF, you will see all the answers, and I don't want to give too much away, but the third page, I write out all of the 2-5-1s. Just as a reference, if you're confused about something or you want to check your work, or this is still a little too complicated for you and you just kind of want to work through it before you go back and try to memorize them all, that's totally fine. I included them all on the third page, but it is really good practice to challenge yourself and write them all out on the blank page here on page 2. If you remember at the beginning of this video, I said, what is a 2-5-1? You might have a lot of thoughts that come up when I ask that question. If you notice, in this video, all I've been talking about is the literal what is it on the page. What are the chord symbols? What are the notes of each of those chords? I haven't yet talked about how to use it, and I did that purposely. We only have a certain amount of bandwidth to think about things when we're practicing. We can't focus on the technical aspect of the instrument and intonation and air, and then focus on playing it perfectly in time, and then also playing all the right chord tones, but then also thinking about voice leading, and then also thinking about the scales, and then also thinking about improvising, and then thinking, oh, where are the 2-5-1s? How do I identify them? What about the alterations? Taking your time when practicing, thinking of simple, concise ideas, working through them slowly, and then applying them to other things in context is going to be the best way and the most efficient use of your practicing. I always say practice makes permanent. If you try to jump way ahead and do all this with a lot of mistakes and you're really not sure and you're jumping around and overwhelmed, that's only going to cause you to continue making mistakes because you're reinforcing either bad habits or incorrect things. Take your time. Don't worry about where to use a 2-5-1 yet. Don't worry about identifying altered 2-5-1s. We'll get to that later. Right now, I want you to be able to know what all the 2-5-1s are in all 12 major keys. And if that's too hard, worry about it in one key. Concert C, concert B flat, concert F. Pick a single key and nail the 2-5-1 in that key. Be able to identify all the notes, write out all the notes, play all the notes, and then work on the 7-3-7 and 3-7-3 voice leading. If you're able to do that even in one key, your playing is going to open up. You're going to be more musical when you play, more lyrical, more melodic, and you're just going to be able to get through the chord changes in a much better way than you did before when you were kind of guessing at some of these notes. If you made it to this part in the video, I thank you so very much for coming along with me on this 2-5-1 journey. Like I said, this is the first of a 3-part series I'm doing about 2-5-1s. And in the next one, I'm going to start talking about how to actually improvise through the chord changes using the skills that you learned in this video. I'm going to talk about how to create some lines. I'm going to talk about voice leading, and I'm going to talk about how to make something sound good when you're focused on chord changes and not just playing any random thing. Don't forget to download the PDF that's at the top of the description and the pinned comment below. Let me know if you have any questions about this. I'd love to hear from you, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.